All right. Hello, everyone. This is the Kuhani Mwa Deli Food Show, and I am here with an esteemed guest, my mentor, a man who I consider a mentor, a man who I consider a friend, um, Mr. Robin Oliver Walker. He is an author of many works. I would consider his magnum opus, When We Rule, to be his best work, and he is head and CEO of the Black Secret Education Project, and he is also a Saturday school teacher. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the kind
So, Robert,
introduction.
tell us about yourself.
I do four major things. I'm a publisher, I'm a writer, I'm an educator, and I'm an entrepreneur. And I believe in putting forward things that can move the community on. And what I'm trying to do is very, very much combine my knowledge and that make me useful in ways that I can advance the community.
Hmm. So, I was looking at all of your interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always noticed that out of all the people who interviewed you, they never really asked you about your life, your upbringings, what you
Mm-hmm.
used to do back in the day. So, could you give us a autobiographical account of your life?
Okay, well, I was born in London in 1967. Um, I lived in Britain for the first 4 years of my life. I spent 2 years in Jamaica. That's where my family's from. My parents' marriage collapsed in Jamaica, and so the result was my mum brought me back to Britain. And so of my growing up, most of it was spent in there's a new city in England called Milton Keynes. Most of my growing up was done in Milton Keynes. I have a church background. So my mum was a fundamentalist Christian, so I grew up as part of that. And growing up in Milton Keynes, um, I my best subjects at school were maths, physics, and music. And I do have a background in classical music. I used to play, there's a brass instrument called the euphonium. I think in America it's called the tenor tuba. Um, and I also used to play the trombone, and I've also got a background in classical guitar. So when I came to London as an adult now to go to university, my original interest was to become a classical musician. So I was at Goldsmiths College, which is part of the University of London, year of a music degree before switching over to becoming an economist. And it's during that period that I started to learn about Black history and that kind of thing. But my initial interest was maths, physics, and music.
Hmm. Wow.
You didn't
So
expect to hear that, did you? You didn't expect to hear that.
I really didn't, man. But it's like I went to a performing arts school back in the day, right? And a lot of
Mm-hmm,
my friends were big time musicians, like classical pianists. So you got that vibe about yourself. You know what I'm saying?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Britain, there's a tradition that's called the brass band tradition. And the brass bands come out of the white working class thing. Um, uh, They were traditionally attached to mining companies and engineering companies. Scene. So I used to play in brass bands. I've also played in orchestras. And when I came to London, I joined a black jazz orchestra called the Jazz Warriors. There's a very, very famous black British jazz man called Courtney Pine, and him and his wife started the Jazz Warriors. And I was in that, and that was the beginnings of me becoming culturally educated, because the Jazz Warriors taught me a lot about culture. They taught me a lot about seriousness, and it rubbed off on me.
Hmm. I was listening to the Jazz Warriors by Courtney Pine probably a year or two ago, right? And Courtney Pine is the cat with the dreadlocks and the glasses, right?
He didn't have that then, trust me. He didn't look like that then.
Okay.
What happened was, in the 80s, there was a jazz revolution led by Wynton Marsalis in America and Courtney Pine in Britain. Wynton was the leader of the school, and he was suited and elegant. And Courtney copied that suited and elegant style. So he didn't have the dreadlocks then, he didn't have the glasses then.
Hmm.
So if
Yeah.
you check old film footage of the Jazz Warriors, we were suited, we were elegant later.
Hmm. So you said that when you was touring with the Jazz Warriors, they was teaching you about culture and Black history, right?
That's right, that's right.
What,
So
what okay.
So the kind of things was, they would say to me, if you're going to be serious about jazz, you have to study Charlie Parker. You have to study Coltrane. You have to study Davis. You have to study Blakey. And so I bought the biographies and autobiographies of all of these musicians. And I read them from cover to cover. So I read Be or Not to Bop. I read Coltrane's biography. I read Miles Davis's autobiography, the one written by Quincy Troop. I read Charles Mingus's Beneath the Underdog. And at the time, Wynton Marsalis was promoting an intellectual called Albert Murray, who wrote a book called Stomping the Blues. And reading this material and cultured, that was the beginnings of it.
Hmm. So what was like the first did they like give you any of the Black history classics as well, back in the day when you was touring with them? Like any books on
Um,
Windrush? Because you said you're Jamaican and everything.
mhm.
Like,
at the time, Black people in Britain history rather than our own, because at the time it was really thought that Black Britons don't really have much history. So we looked to American history. But one of the classics, Courtney had read it. There was a bass player called Ike Leo, he had read it. Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. Another
mm,
one that Courtney had read was Yusef Ben Yokanan's Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. And these were the first two books I ever read on. And you may know this already, but Chancellor Williams's book in particular, that was the book that changed my life.
mm. See, that's a classic work, especially like because I consider that work like a really good historiography, especially at like the very end when he talks about what a historian is supposed to do and believe in and things of that nature.
Yeah,
A-
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so, who was like also your, besides Courtney, I'm gonna bring up another individual who's a mentor of yours that you mentioned. Um, how was your relationship with Dr. Femi Biko?
I idolize that guy. I idolize that guy. Femi Biko was a Nigerian heritage um intellectual. He was seriously intellectual. And I'd never come across somebody that bright across that. Exceptionally well read, exceptionally scholarly, and he brought a precision and an exactitude to Black history. And to give you an example of what I mean, when he was training us to teach Black history, we were not allowed to use Chancellor Williams's book because, as far as he's concerned, the book isn't referenced, and because it isn't referenced, don't use it. In
Hmm.
other words, his thing was very, very much about you only stick to what you know you can prove. And that's the kind of rigor that Femi. Now, in Britain, Black history, until very, 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 very recently, was not taught in any of the British institutions. So the way Femi taught Black history is he taught it outside the system. So there'd be Black community centers, and he would hire a room and then teach his courses 2 hours per week. And he would structure his courses very, very tightly, that anything he says can be referenced. And he set a very, very high standard of intellectual engagement. And so I studied with him in the year 1990. And he could see that I was making a little bit of progress. So in 1991, he began asking me, could I deputize for him on some of his classes? And then in 1992, he gave me his notes and some basis to teach. And then gradually, I started to develop my own courses based on his notes. And also, there was a time period in my life when I worked as a night porter in a hotel.
Hmm.
And during that period, because everyone goes to bed at midnight, I could then read through the night. So I read Van Sertima's books, I read Diop's books. The historian that most was John Jackson. He preferred Jackson's work to Chancellor Williams's work. I have the opposite perspective, but I'm just telling you this is what Femi says. So I read Jackson's works, and gradually I started putting my own content together. And so by about 1992 is when I began teaching Black Studies. Again, we teach it outside the system. And then by about 94, I had seriously started to, and then everything that I've been doing ever since then has been putting more and more and more of my content together.
Hmm. See, I can imagine the type of sleepless nights that you be having when you have to compose, works that you've created over the years, man. Because I've seen like your YouTube lectures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with my mate Manny, and man, I mean those
Mm-hmm.
PowerPoints are like top quality, you know, better than people that be on Netter, man. I mean, I could tell. Like, I'd be like, man, Robert, how did you come up with finding this new information on Briar Rabbit, man? Like, man, like you are the man. Like, seriously, you are.
And even the stuff on Brer Rabbit, I learned that from reading Ivan Van Sertima. But what Van Sertima didn't do was document it. He said it, he didn't document it. And since then, I've just found the data. Do you see? I've just found the data. Yes,
Hmm.
as you know, Brer Rabbit is the parent of Peter Rabbit in England and Bugs Bunny in the United States.
See, I knew about that when I watched one of your Zoom lectures I was a part of. I forget which one it was, but I'm always every time you post in the Black Secret, I'm always watching, supporting you and whatever. And that was like it blew my
Hmm.
mind
Hmm.
that scholar said that Bugs Bunny is a copy of Briar Rabbit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, this is what I wanted to ask you.
Oh,
What?
just for your own reference, if you watch some of the earliest Bugs Bunny, you know the character Elmer Fudd.
Yep.
He was originally black. Quite serious. If you watch the earliest Bugs Bunny, you can find them on YouTube. Elmer Fudd. Now he wasn't called Elmer Fudd, but same thing. He had his rifle hunting rabbits. He was originally a black guy. Now they gave him a really stereotypical slave accent.
Y-
Yeah, so it's very, very disrespectful. But yeah, he was originally black, and you can find that online.
Mm, okay. I'm gonna make sure to go through the archives on YouTube and find it because that blew my mind right there.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I want to ask you
yeah,
this question. The first time I had heard about you was like a couple of years ago. Um, it was when I think you was at a Black Noble bookstore in New York,
yeah.
and you
Mm-hmm,
did a
mm-hmm.
PowerPoint presentation on when we ruled. And when I was watching you teach to the people, one of the
Yeah.
first thoughts in my head was like, man, I got a brother from England. I'm not used to hearing that English accent from a another black person. Number one, excuse my ignorance and stuff, but we Americans,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to think that the world revolves around us. And
Yeah, yeah.
the second thing was is like how like masculine you were, like you was in very you was in very you had very good command over the crowd, man. And I was just glued to my computer, and I was like, I need to grab this brother's book. So my question to you is,
What it
what is
is.
hmm
Mm-hmm. No,
what'd you say,
carry on,
sir?
carry on, carry on. No, carry on, carry on.
And
Your question is, carry on.
when I when I was done watching the lecture, I was like, I need to buy this brother's book. So my question to you is, sir, what made you want to come up with your magnum opus, When We Ruled?
I had a number of rules, and these are what the reasons were. Firstly, Dr. Femi Biko had produced a reading list for us to teach Black Studies, and to teach the history part. It was just loads and loads and loads of books. And I realized, as someone teaching this, you can't expect people to buy 10, 15 books on history. So the problem was there wasn't a single book that put everything together. The closest was probably John Jackson's. That was the closest. But there was too much missing. So if you look at John Jackson's books and you ask the question, where are the maps, bro? There aren't any maps in the book. So he's talking about Carthage, he's talking about Numidia. If you ask most people, where is Carthage on the map? They can't tell you. Numidia, where's that on the map? Most people can't tell you. He's talking about ancient Ghana, medieval Mali, the Songhai Empire. Where is these on the map? Most people can't tell you. And so I recognize that. Then we are talking about African greatness. Now, Chancellor Williams gives the impression that everything was destroyed. And then I'm finding out that there are monuments still standing in West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. Where are these monuments? People need to see them. So, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, in Tanzania, there's a ruin of a palace called the Husuni Kubwa Palace, the ruin of the swimming pool. Yes, folks, a 14th century African palace with an indoor swimming pool. And I thought that these things needed to be seen. Then you've got all the fine art. Then you've got all the manuscripts. All of these things need to be seen. And the books by Black scholars tended not to have very good pictures. Then you've got the research of people like Professor Ivan van Sertima and his students, Charles Finch and Runoko Rashidi, images of Black people in the Middle East, Black people in the Far East, and so on. And they had images. And my thing was those images need to be in a book. And so what When We Ruled is an update and synthesis of Chancellor Williams, John Jackson, W.E.B. Du Bois, Ivan van Sertima, Runoko Rashidi, Charles Finch. All these people have been synthesized together, and the whole thing has been updated. The thing that I did in writing When We Ruled is I felt it was important to base what I was doing in the European tradition as well. So you had European writers, such as the diplomats, spies, and envoys, who were spying on Africa between 1500 and 1900. And their accounts of African civilizations are spy reports. Their findings need to be in the book. Then you've got the classical scholars of Greece and Rome. Their findings need, and you've got what I call the 19th century pioneers, people like Count de Volney, people like General Sir Henry Rawlinson. Their findings need to be in the book. Then you've got the beginnings of anthropology, people like Charles Darwin. His findings need to be in the book. And then you've got people like the liberal Africanists, the most obvious one being Dr. Basil Davidson.
The GOAT.
His findings. What my book is a synthesis of all of that, do you see?
Mm-hmm. So when that book came out, I remember I was watching your lectures, and you went back home to Jamaica,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
you showed a picture of you giving When We Ruled to the Prime Minister of Jamaica at the time. From your knowledge, do you know if she that was a lady, right? Or
Yeah,
um,
that's right. Right Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. I don't know if she's read it, but if she does read it and she changes her name to Ra Hatshepsut Amen, I'm taking full credit. I did that. But if she does do that, yeah.
hmm,
Um, Again, I have to big up the Jamaican posse. They looked after me really, really well. My business in being in Jamaica was England in 2007. 2007 is 200 years away from 1807. They were about to celebrate 200 years of Britain abolishing slavery. Now, that, of course, is nonsense. And the Jamaican intellectuals knew it was nonsense. The Bajan intellectuals knew it was nonsense. So what they did was they invited different scholars to come to the Caribbean to help whip up a campaign to cancel how they abolished slavery in 1807. Do you see? And so
hmm,
I was part of this counter offensive invited by the Jamaican and Bajan intellectuals to come with an anti-1807 campaign. And so that was my business in being in Jamaica, and the Jamaican people looked after me really, really well. And as you know, I got to meet the Prime Minister and give her the book.
okay. Now, I want to ask you questions concerning the campaign, and you're probably gonna laugh when I use this terminology because I'm a huge fan of Bob Marley, right? When you were
Yeah.
when you were doing the campaign, was there any bald heads that was like putting y'all in danger at all? You know what
Not
I'm
at all.
saying?
No, not at all. Not at all. This is what actually happened. Well, first of all, Jamaica has moved on a lot. And what I mean by that is Jamaica used a colonial, brainwashed mindset, right?
Right.
But what happened was that's moved on. People are a lot less brainwashed, a lot more pro-African. So a lot of the events that happened when I was in Jamaica in 2007, a lot of them started with African type libations. And because I've got a little bit of knowledge about how a Yoruba libation starts, though, so you have a priestess, and then she would pour, and then she would call on Olodumare, she'd pour, she would call on Yemaja, she'd pour. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, you would never have seen that in Jamaica. Back in the day, some of the Jamaican government elites wear African clothes. Back in the day, you would never have seen that. The Jamaican events start with, I said, with the Yoruba, and the amount of Africanity that they're trying to embrace. They would never have done that back in the day. So even the people called bald heads, a lot of them were African centered. Now, not everybody's African centered, but the percentage of Jamaicans that were African centered was higher than I even thought possible. Do you see? So things have moved on. In other words, they have attempted to address your mindset and change it. They've attempted to address the brainwashed mindset and change it. So, people have read Frantz Fanon and they've fixed up. They've read anti-colonial literature and they've fixed up. And so Jamaica is a lot more, what's the word, inviting of African culture now than at any time in its history. Do you see?
Mm-hmm. See, that makes me happy because when I look at my ethnic group,
Yeah.
i.e. African American, we're messing up in the game. There's a lot of scholars who I know who are PhDs. I'm not gonna say their names, and many other prominent African American intellectuals are saying foolishness like we're our own tribe now. America is our home. Buffoonery. And it makes me happy to know that my cousin's a boat ride away is still holding the line. And you know, Marcus Garvey could go back to Jamaica today and not get stoned to death like he would have done back in the day. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely. Now let's be clear: the stupid element in Jamaica does exist, but the difference is the proportionality is different. Do you see? The proportionality is different. There's more sensible people now than there's ever been. Do you see? Yeah.
hmm, that's great. So like the colorism in Jamaica is really like gonna be non-existent and
It's
all of
less
that.
of a thing. Yeah, let me answer that. Well, let me answer that. In 2007, when I went, I was looking for it because it's something I'm very, very conscious of. I was looking for it. And the moment we got off the plane, and we're going through customs, it was now ordinarily he wouldn't have been there. Do you see? Back in the day, he wouldn't have had that position. And the richest parts of Jamaica is the North Coast. The North Coast is where the big mansions are and so on. And as I was driving past, I was looking at who was there, and normally the wealthiest Jamaicans would be light skinned. Not anymore. In other words, the thing was changing. The thing
Mm,
was changing. was good to see.
Okay. Uh, I have another question. Um,
Yes, sir.
so let's talk about you being on Hidden Colors 3. Um,
Four,
how did
four,
you want
four.
oh, Hidden Colors 4, I'm sorry. How did you wind up getting on that project?
Okay, let me tell you the story. It's a funny story, actually. What happened was Tariq Nasheed Elite had come to London and was speaking at an event in London. And one of my friends, him, so we arranged a meeting, and the meeting was cancelled. And then my same friend tried to meet with him again, cancelled. And so what actually ended up happening was we went to the event that he was speaking at. It came to the break, and then my friend rushed up to him and said, read this. And then I gave him my book, When We Ruled. And that was it.
Hmm.
Right. And once Tariq had When We Ruled, what then happened was got a phone call from his assistant to say that, Mr. Nasheed wants to meet with you, blah, 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 blah. And eventually what happened was Tariq Nasheed arranged for me to fly out to Los Angeles. He booked me into a hotel, and then one of his drivers, or the driver that he arranged, picked me up, went to his home, and essentially he filmed in his basement. Tariq's home, and it was about a 2-hour interview, something like that. And then they were able to cut the interview up, and it then became the excerpts that went into the film Hidden Colors 4.
Hmm.
So it's purely luck, my friend trying to meet him, and then, Tariq reading my book.
Hmm. Okay. Um, for some reason, they say the meeting is gonna cut off at 7 minutes. So if it winds up cutting off the interview, I'm gonna set up another one. We're gonna do a part two and stuff like that. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask this other question. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what did Hidden Colors 4 do for you on an international scale?
To be absolutely honest, this is what it did for me. Zero.
Really?
I got based on it. Nothing. Yes, quite seriously. It did nothing for me. I mean, I'm grateful that I was on it. Big up to Tariq Nasheed Elite, but it did nothing for me. Not internationally, it didn't.
Mm,
Let's just say it again. That's what it did.
mm,
There were
okay.
no speaking engagements that came from it. Nothing.
Mm. That's pretty interesting because it was like when I first saw the series, like it seemed like to me that he brought many obscure Black Pan-Africanist scholars, back from the dead in terms of like, notoriety and things of that nature. So I was like, let me, ask you.
Now, the main beneficiary of Hidden Colors in terms of prominence was Dr. Umar Johnson. But for me, that's what happened. Yeah. Zero.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. You've already like you're kind of I wouldn't be wrong to say that you are the John Henry Clark of the UK, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose so. I mean, there's about 3 or 4 people that do the kind of thing that the difference is I put out more books. That's the real difference. And because I've got the books out, there's a frame of reference that people can read, and that's the big difference.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I remember when I had first bought your book When We Ruled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was I love reading like 857-page books, right?
Yeah.
And I thought at first that it was going to be a
Mm-hmm.
labor of love, that this is going to be a lot for me to go through. It's going to take me at least 3 days. But one thing I liked about it was that
Yeah.
it has a lot of meat in it, but it's easy to chew. Like,
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
did you able to compose that book like that, man? I mean, that's 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 like unorthodox in terms of 857 page work. That's very easy, like it's an easy read. How did you
Yeah.
compose?
This is why. My background is as an educationalist. So I've got the standard school teaching qualification in England is called a PGCE. So when I, finished, graduated in economics, my next thing was to become a PGCE in education, postgraduate certificate of education. So I know how to teach. And because I know how to teach, I know how to make something simple. I know how to bring clarity. So I don't need to use big words. I don't need to, add added complexity. I know how to make something simple. I know how to put an argument together in a very, very simple and logical way. And that's really what I've done with When We Ruled. So When We Ruled is really simple. There's lots of it, but it's simple, it's logical, and I don't waste people's time talking about things that don't matter. Do you see? So it was a lot of fun to write. So I began writing, and then the first edition came out in 2006. Um, then after that, I did an update in 2013 where I rewrote the slavery chapter. And some other things got rewritten, and I put in a lot more images, and then that became the second edition. And then in America, there's a different one called what I call the American edition. That's the one with the introduction by Runoko Rashidi. That's the one published by Black Classic Press.
I have that one in my
And
library.
yeah, a lot of fun.
Mm. Are you going to write any more books?
Um, I'm always writing all the time, but let me give you an example. A white mainstream company approached me a couple years ago and asked me to write something on Black history for them. And the book came out. It's called Black History Matters. And that same company has come back to me to ask for another children's book, with title yet, but it might be called A Children's History of Africa. And if that book appears, so in other words, I'm always putting things together. And it's quite possible that by next year, my business will have grown to big enough where I could work on perhaps a third edition of When We Ruled. And then that will be the next thing that I'll do.
Okay, that makes sense. My Zuby that says it's gonna cut off in like less than a minute. So if it does, remember I'm gonna call you and then I'm gonna make another one and then we just keep going. Um,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that I honestly like that because, like, I mean, it seems that out of all of the scholars that are, that are known, right? You are the only one, in my opinion, that's really holding the line in terms of elegance, in terms of being serious, because a lot of people